I'd like to ask you to all put your seats into the upright position for takeoff. Fasten your seatbelts because we're in for a real ride today. As you will all soon see. But Baruch Hashem.
Thank you. Yeah.
We didn't quite finish the last piece of the Gemara, so just to warm us up, we'll finish up the last piece of the Gemara from Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph before we dive into Yud Ches Amud Beis. So I'll just give everybody a chance to come in, and then we.
Yeah, I didn't get you a copy of the Chagiga yet. Sent to me. Rabbi Smith said he would order it. Is there any way you could check it out?
I can ask him. Who's this speaking?
Shlomo Yosef Solomon.
Okay, so I will mention it to him. Shlomo Yosef Solomon. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
He did send me loose sheets, which we copied over in the facility here. But I'm waiting for the Chagiga from art school.
Okay, I will mention it to him when I speak to him next, which I'll mention it right after the class to him. Okay, God willing.
Oh, wonderful. What's your name? Shalom Cohen?
My name is Eli Cohen.
Eli Cohen. I'm trying to locate a Shalom Cohen from the Chabad of Avenue Y near my, this is the Harbor View senior residence.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure.
You're not familiar with that? Is there a Shalom Cohen from Avenue Y Chabad?
I'm sure there is.
You might know him?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know him.
Yeah. And you're not related to him?
No. When people ask me which Cohen I am, I just tell them the other one.
Very cute, very cute. Okay, I'm trying to get. I'm glad you're able to hear me. A lot of times you can't even hear me. I don't register on your end. I have my phone on, the cell phone, and not the computer. And I can't see you. Sometimes I don't even see you. But okay, we've been managing the best we can.
All right.
So carry on and good luck all around. Have a beautiful Pesach and a good year.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, we're just gonna give it another.
You got me in the program?
Yeah, you're in the program.
Okay, I can put my cell phone down to listen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're on that Yud Ches Amud Beis.
No, we're almost there. We're at the bottom of Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph by the two dots. So just finishing off one small piece we didn't finish off on Friday, and then we're going to go into Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. Okay.
How many dafim altogether in Chagiga?
It's 27 till Daf goes down Amud Aleph.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay. Maybe the next Gemara you can pick Shachim before Pesach would be a Machaya, a kesher, a beautiful connection.
Right. However, I'm not sure we're going to be finished Chagiga before Pesach. So,
all right.
All right. We're ready to get started. We're holding Yud Ches Amud Aleph at the bottom of the Amud by the two dots where it says Umutarn Behesped V'Tainis. This is in the art scroll, it's 18.3a, and in the regular Gemara, it's 2, 4, about 5 lines up from the bottom. Okay, so we mentioned in the Mishnah, we said that with regards to what we call Yom Tavayach, so we said Yom Tavayach, when it falls out on Shavuos, right? In other words, there's a meaning Yom Tavayach is only after Shavuos, really, because all the other Yom Tovim have Tashlumin on the other days of Yom Tov. Shavuos is the only one that only has one day. So we have a Yom Tavoyach, where according to Beis Shammai, because you couldn't do the Oilas Re'iyah on Yom Tov, and you couldn't do the smicha for the carbon shlamim. So if you hadn't done it before Yom Tov, you wouldn't be able to bring that up either. So therefore, there's a Yom Tovach, a special day of slaughtering, to bring up these animals after the day after Yom Tov. So now we said that if what happens that is that if Yom Tov fell out in a way that Yom Tovach would be on Sunday, then we say with regarding to that particular day of that Sunday that it is mutter, it is permitted the husband of Tainus to engage in eulogy and fasting. Why? Because it's in order to not to uphold the word of the who were of the opinion that Atzeres, meaning Shavuos, would always be the day after Shabbos. Why would it be always the day after Shabbos? The reason is because they held that when it says Osfartem lochem mimachas Shabbos, that you should count for yourselves after the Shabbos, they didn't believe that it was the day after Yom Tov. They said it was the day after Shabbos, literally a Sunday. And so if that's the case, the Matzah Shabbos would be the beginning of the counting, and Shavuos would always fall out on Sunday. And because we don't want to accord or to show ourselves to even allow for anybody to mistakenly think that Shavuos is on a Sunday when it wasn't on a Sunday, right? Therefore, we say we allow you to do the hesped and we allow you to do the tainus, even though ordinarily we would say you shouldn't do it because this is a special day that we're bringing up the karbanis for the Yom Tov. Okay, so Frank the Gemara, if you're saying this, how does it make sense with another brisa? V'hatani, did we not learn in another brisa that there was a story?
Yeah. A million lady.
Maisa, and there was a story. Alexa belud. Alexa passed away in Lud. And all of the heathen came because they wanted to eulogize him. And Reb Tarfon would not allow them to do that because it was the Yom Tov of Shavuos. And Reb Tarfon was not going to allow them to give a eulogy on the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Frank the Gemara, Yom Tov Sak Daitach, can you really think that it was Yom Tov? Who would think that you're allowed to do a eulogy on Yom Tov? Even Yom Tov, it was on Yom Tov. Mikasa, who would have come to eulogize him? Of course, you're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov. There's no opinion that says you're allowed to do a hesped on Yom Tov. So rather, so maybe you have to amend the brisa that you should read it to be Yom Tavayach. It was the Yom Tavayach, and Reb Tarfon didn't allow them to do a eulogy even on Yom Tavayach. But what do we see from here? We see from over here that even though we just said that when it falls out on a Sunday, you should come along and you should still do the eulogy, even though people are offering up sacrifices on that day. But here we have a situation where Reb Tarfon didn't allow it. So why didn't Reb Tarfon allow it? So seemingly it's a kasha, and for the Gemara, like kasha, it's not difficult. There's no difficulty here. Why? Kan b'Yom Tov shecholi is achar Shabbos. Here in the brisa, we're speaking of a case in which Yom Tov fell after Shabbos, right? And so therefore, in that situation where it's not, the Yom Tovayach is not going to be on a Sunday, it's going to be on a regular day of the week. So then Reb Tarfon didn't want anybody eulogizing because the day is a special day. People are still bringing up their karbanis from Yom Tov. But Kan b'Yom Tov shechol is b'Shabbos. Here, what we're speaking about in the case of Beis Shammai in our Mishnah is talking about the case where Yom Tov fell out on Shabbos, so the Yom Tovayach would be on Sunday. In that case, lafuke, to not uphold the view of the tzedukkim, so therefore he says that you should dafka do the eulogy and the tainus on the day after Yom Tov. So that's the end of this Gemara. Now we turn over to Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, and we're going to get into a whole sugya, and really this carries us pretty much through the rest of the Masechta. We're dealing a lot to do with Tu'uma and Tahara. So now, a little bit of a brief introduction is in place. First, I need to make a disclaimer. I am not an expert in Tumat Tahara. I should be. I'm a Kohen. I should be an expert in Tumat Tahara. However, when this is something that you do not engage with every day, then it's very difficult to hold on and retain, the different levels of Tumat Tahara, what makes what impure, if you're not really enacting it in day-to-day life. However, one of the things that the Chachamim instituted is that there should be this remembrance of how important Tumat Tahara was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, even today, there are many things that we do in order to be more sensitive to Tumat Tahara. And one of the things that the rabbis instituted is washing the hands. Now, what's this idea of washing hands? Usually, if somebody became tamei in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, mid'oraisa, from according to Torah, the way you become pure is you go to a mikvah. There's no such thing as washing your hands and becoming pure when it comes to the time of the Beis Hamikdash and dealing with things when you are tamei. When you're tamei, your whole body is tamei, and if you want to purify yourself, you've got to go to the mikvah. However, what happened was, even in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash, people started to become very lax in the laws of Tumat Tahara. And what I mean by that is, the Amei Haaretz, the regular people, who most of the time, right, didn't come into contact with anything that was going to be considered to be holy, so they were not careful, or they were not that careful when it comes to the laws of purity and impurity, because they had no need to do that. So therefore, there are problems that are going to happen, not just for them, but for people who come into contact with them. And since people are going to come into contact with them, so we have to basically establish a whole set of, fences around the laws of purity to ensure that people become more sensitive to it, so that we don't come to a situation where either a person is going to be consuming something which needs to be eaten in purity and they're not pure, or that food that is pure, that has to be consumed pure, will be touched by somebody who is impure, and then you've got to burn it. Then you can't eat it. And that's throwing something out, and we don't want to do that. So as a result of that, there were extra stringencies made with regards to Tumah and Tahara. Now, here is where I have to share something with you, and hopefully it's going to make sense. And I hope Hashem gives me siyata d'shmaya to get this all right. Okay. There are different types of levels when it comes to Tahara. You have chulin. Chulin is what we call regular food, and regular food, right, we say can receive, in other words, can contract tumah. It can contract tumah, and anybody who is eating this chulin, right, can affect the chulin to become one of the following categories, one of the following levels of tumah. So there are really 5 levels of tumah. So let's go over to the kodesh side. You see the kodesh on the kodesh. So you've got avi avois hatumah. Avi avois hatumah is really only a corpse. A corpse, a dead body, is the only thing that we consider avi avois hatumah, and it has the most power to spread tumah. Okay, now anybody that comes into contact with avi avois hatumah becomes an av hatumah. Okay, you got that? Now that's not the only way to be an av hatumah. To be an av hatumah is ezav, azava, a nida, and a yeledes. They are all av hatumah, and anybody who comes into contact with them can become tamei as a result of that. Now, what's a zav and a zava? A zav and a zava is either a male or a female who have a strange emission a number of times. Then they contract what's called the tumah of a zav and a zava, and they become an avatuma. A nida is a woman who's menstruating during her cycle, so she's an avatuma. And a yeledes is somebody who just gave birth, so she's also an avatuma. They can be mitama those under them. Now, when it comes to saying that we are careful to various degrees, it depends how important the food we're speaking about is. So when it comes to chulin, we only go 3 steps or 4 steps. You have avia voice that can make an avatuma, that can then, if they come into contact with anything like that, becomes a rishon l'tuma, and if anything comes into contact with that, they become a sheni l'tuma. Okay, so that's how far we go with chulin. Okay, we do not have what's considered a shlishi l'tuma when it comes to chulin. After a sheni, it does not pass it on. Okay, that's with regards to chulin. Truma, we go up a level. When it comes to truma, we say no, because we have to be more careful when it comes to eating truma. What is truma? Truma is the 2% that was separated from the crop that was given to the kayin. So when we talk about bread, right, bread of truma, right, you can have the avia voice, which passes on to be an av, which passes on to be a rishon, which passes on to be a sheni, which can pass on to be a shlishi. Okay, so that's how far we go. We don't go any further when it comes to truma. When it comes to kodesh, which these are the things that have been sanctified in the Beis Hamikdash, like karbanos, right? So when a person is eating his shlamim, right, for example, or whether when a kohen is eating parts of the animal that he was able to eat in the Beis Hamikdash, so then we go a step further, and you have avia voice, which can then pass on to an avatuma, which can pass on to be a rishon l'tuma, sheni, shlishi, and then we go as far as a revi'i l'tuma. Now, why is this important? The reason why this is important is because if we say, for example, somebody is very, very careful when it comes to things of chulin, that he will not touch any bread, right, without clean hands, even if it's chulin, meaning it's regular bread, right? Because he's only careful for chulin, because he doesn't really come into contact with truma, because he's not a kohen, for example. So we say if he touches truma, right, then it's a problem, because he's only careful up to the level of sheni. But when it comes to the level of shlishi, he's not careful. He hasn't been conscious about protecting his hand, not to come into tomei, to the level of the truma that's required for the truma. And the same thing we would say with somebody who's careful with truma but not for kodesh. Then if any of his clothes touch something that, or if he touches somebody that is careful with kodesh, then that person has a problem. Okay, there's one more that I don't have over here, and that is the mechatos. Mechatos, right, is when it came to preparing the ashes of the para aduma. The para aduma had this special water, this called the mechatos, that was made in a very special way. However, because it is so potent, we say that there's even a 5th level chamishi, right, which we are careful with. And so therefore, if somebody is careful with their hands and with the rest of themselves to make sure that they don't even come into contact with a revi'i, right, if they then touch somebody who has to deal with mechatos, it becomes a problem, because that one has to be careful even up until chamishi. Now, there's one more thing I need to explain before we can start reading the Mishnah, and there may be more things, but that's what I can think of right now. And if anybody has any questions, you can ask after I explain the following. Okay, there's something called tumas midras. Tumas midras is also known as tumas mishkav u'moshav, and this is basically, midras means to step on, mishkav u'moshav means to lie on, right? This is specific, a special tumah that is specific to an item that is usually designated to either stand on, sit on, or lie on. Okay, so now, if, for example, an av hatuma, which is a zav, a zama, a zava, a nida, or a ledes, or a matzera, right? If they sit on a chair, lie on a bed, or anything else that is designated that you could lie on it or sit on it, a mat, and so on, right? They can make that a rishon l'tuma. Okay, they can make it a rishon l'tuma, and a person or an object that is in a state of sheni l'tuma, they become a vlada tuma, right? An avatuma, right? Can make a person or an object that is in a state of tuma, right? They can make a set. They can make a second tuma, second tuma. Now, one second. Okay, so so here's this. One who touches an avatuma becomes a vladatuma, right? Or we call it a rishon, right? And this vladatuma can only be matama food and drink, which becomes a sheni, which means to say, are you confused yet? Because if you're not confused, you're not listening, right? Okay, so let me explain. When it comes to a vladatuma, which means somebody who touched an avatuma, the only thing they can be matama is food and drink, which then becomes a sheni, and a sheni cannot be matama food of chulin, right? Because we said an av, right, then touches somebody, and that becomes a rishon. That rishon, right, can only be matama food, right, which becomes a sheni, and that's as far as it goes when it comes to chulin. But when it comes to kodesh kodesh and truma, it can go as far as a shlishi. With truma and with kodesh, it will become a revi. Now, here's the thing: there's a special gzeira of the chachamim that the liquids of vladatuma, right, can be matama people and kalim, and this is because it's a gzeira from the fluids, the liquid that come from a zav and a zava that can also be matame people and kalim. So that's as far as I wanted to explain with regards to Tumah Tahara. And one more thing, it's always one more thing, right? There's one more thing, and that is the Chachamim made a special gezerah. And that is that when it comes to Stam Yodayim, which means because we believe that a person's hands are usually active and busy constantly, and therefore we're not always careful where our hands are. So if you were not consciously thinking about your hands and what they're doing and where they're touching, then we call your hands Stam Yodayim. And because we call your hands Stam Yodayim, we give them, or the Chachamim give them, the status of Sheni L'Tumah. Become Sheni L'Tumah. What did we say about Sheni L'Tumah? We said Sheni L'Tumah, right? Sheni L'Tumah. What did we say about Sheni?
Only transfer for the Cohens.
A Sheni L'Tumah, right, cannot be matama food of chulin, but a Sheni L'Tumah can make truma and kodesh tamei. Okay. Now there's one more thing that you need to also know just for this Mishnah, and that is with regards to Svarim. The Chachamim made a takana that anybody who touches Sifrei Kodesh, if you touch Sifrei Kodesh, then those Sifrei Kodesh make your hands Sheni L'Tumah. Okay? They make it Sheni L'Tumah. Why did they make that gezerah? Very interestingly, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going off memory over here, but I remember this from the past, is that people used to keep their truma next to Sfarim. And what would happen as a result is they would think, just like the Sfarim are holy, and so too the truma is holy, so I keep it over here, else to keep it safe. And what happened was the mice would come and eat it. So the Chachamim were not happy about that. So in order to keep the truma away from the Sfarim, they say anybody who touches the Sfarim becomes a Sheni L'Tumah. But this is with regards to rabbinically. This is not biblically, this is rabbinically, they become sheni l'tumah. This way we keep the food away, the truma away from the Sifrei Kodesh. Now, because we say that all the things that we've just mentioned up until now are extra stringencies that are not biblical, but rather these stringencies are midrabanan. So therefore, the Rabbanan are the ones who say that if you contracted this tumah, which is rabbinically enacted, then the way you can remove that tumah is without having to go to a mikveh necessarily, but you can wash your hands. You take a ravias mayim, you take a certain amount of water, and you take a cup, and you wash your hands. And through washing your hands, that's how you remove the tumah. And as you can understand, that since there's no option to just wash your hands when it comes to a biblical contraction of tumah, you've got to go to the mikveh. One can always understand and readily recognize whether you're talking about something that is midrabanan or whether it's midaraisa. Okay, so that's the brief introduction or the long introduction to understanding what we're going to be learning today. Any questions before we go any further?
From a practical question perspective, in modern times, if a person goes to a cemetery, they wash after they leave the cemetery. So that's at least an ob. And it's sufficient to remove the tumah by just washing one's hands in that situation.
So that's an excellent question. And one thing we have to bear in mind is that as far as the Chachamim are concerned, as far as the Torah is concerned, we are all Tamei Meis, everyone. And the only way to get rid of Tumas Mes is with the Efer of the Paraduma. And we don't have a Paraduma. And since we don't have a Paraduma, we are all considered to be Tamei Meis. Does that mean that we can just throw all of the laws of Tumas Tahara out the window? Certainly not. And therefore, even though we are in a state of Tumas Mes, and therefore we are not allowed to eat anything that is consecrated in the Beis Hamikdash before we become purified, nevertheless, we are still able to eat chulin, which is what we eat, right? We don't eat truma, we don't eat any of these other things, but chulin we do eat. And when it comes to chulin, even though we cannot remove the higher level of tumah, however, we can still, with regards to the certain takonis that the Chachamim made, that we should not come into contact with, for example, chulin bread without washing, so therefore we can wash to remove that concern. But you're right, with regards to going to a cemetery and all these other things, washing our hands is more of a symbolic thing than actually alleviating the problem of Tumas Mes. It doesn't. Okay?
Rabbi.
Yes.
What about in hospitals, in hospital beds with someone could have they could have, they could be a Balkari or whatever it might be, and they're in a bed there, and a Kohen comes and he uses the bed. I mean, there's no real way of purifying the bed, from somebody, a Kohen being put in that bed, or somebody dies in that bed and then they put in a patient in there right afterwards. I mean, how is that to be? So
the thing is like this. When it comes to a Kohen, and I'm a Kohen, and this is a big problem for me, the only real love that we have is to come into contact with the dead directly, direct contact with the dead, not an indirect contact with the dead, but direct contact with the dead, which means to say, if a dead person lay on a bed, once the dead person has left the house, that house is now permissible for a Kohen to enter, even though it has a bed upon which a mess was lying. And the truth is, the Kohen is technically allowed to sleep on that bed at a later stage, right? The only thing a Kohen cannot do is come into contact with a corpse. Now, there's also what's considered to be tumas oyel, which means if you have a dead body in a house, you cannot go under the same roof as that house if you're a kohen, because the oyel, the roof, extends the tumah to anything that's under that roof. And so I remember growing up, it only happened once, but we lived in a semi-detached house, and a few houses were connected, and we're all Yidden, right? I mean, in London, where I grew up, my street were 100% Jews. There were no going on the street. Anyway, so we all of a sudden get a knock on the door. It was at night. It wasn't in the middle of the night, but it was night. And we're told that somebody passed away in the house of a neighbor that lived 2 doors down. And so as a result of that, me, my father, and my brothers, we all had to get out of the house until they'd taken the body out. Why? Because it's all under one roof, and therefore it spreads, and we're considered to be under the same roof as a mess, and that's a lav that one is not allowed to become impure when you're under the same roof with a body. So to answer your question, all the things that are one step lower than that are things that we don't concern ourselves with. But what we do concern ourselves with is if there's somebody who's actually in the morgue downstairs, that's a problem. And look, I guess when it comes to pikuach nefesh, it's kol haTorah kula, so sometimes you don't have a choice. But if you can be careful, one should make sure not to go into a hospital if there are Jewish people in the morgue. And so when I go to hospitals, and I don't go that often, but when I do go to hospitals, I first do have to find out what the setup of the hospital is, because sometimes they have a morgue in a separate building, then I don't have a problem if it's not attached. But if it's attached, it's a problem. It's a real problem. Anyway, so that's that. Any other questions or comments before we start?
Well, along the same lines, what about Cohen's concerns in visiting a Jewish nursing home or aging facility? I know of one Kohen who would contact his local Orthodox rabbi, so to speak, to determine whether or not it was known that there were other people who may be likely to pass on while they're visiting the nursing home.
This is a big problem. I mean, I was recently in Hawaii. I went to take over the rabbi there for the summer, and he called me and he said he got a call from somebody that their sister's living on the other side of the island, and she's in a hospice, and they're planning on cremating her. Would I go over and try and speak to them? So I thought about it, like, well, what do I do over here? Do I go or do I not go? So I decided in the end that this is within the realms of a mess mitzvah, because at the end of the day, if they're going to cremate her, this is a disaster, right? And it's to try and prevent a crime happening. And so I drove over an hour and a half, and I did my best to ascertain where I could stand, where I can't stand. She happened to be outside, so I was able to be outside. I guess it was a nice day, and she was in a bed outside. And I tried to speak to them, and I said Shema with her, and so on and so forth. And it was I went through all these questions, as to what can I do and what can I do, and you have to be very careful. And I would say that when in doubt, stay without, which means don't go. If you could send somebody else, if there is somebody else to go, there was nobody else that could go in my case. But if you can send somebody else, you should send somebody else, and you have to make these assertions before you go. So if you're going to go to a hospice, you need to find out, what the situation is before you walk in. It's a serious thing. It's a serious thing. In fact, I'm looking for another position, to try and find something. So over here, there's a hospice that looking for a chaplain. And I'm like, great, they're offering a nice salary, but I can't go because I'm a Kohen. So it's not going to work. So you have to be careful. There's no question. You have to be careful, and you have to try and ascertain these things in advance. Even an old age home, even if you're going to go and visit somebody in an old age home, you need to make sure that no one has just passed away, and they're just waiting for somebody to pick them up. And you have to understand there would be a difference. I'm assuming there would be a difference. I have to look this up again, but there's a difference between when you go to a Jewish old age home or a non-Jewish old age home, because a Jewish old age home, there's less of a doubt. When it's an old age home, even if somebody passed away, who says they're Jewish, right? But here, when you're saying if somebody passes away and they're definitely Jewish, so you've got a much greater percentage, a much greater chance of coming into contact with Aviyah Satuma, which is not okay. Okay, let's start the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, Noitlin lagadayim. We wash our hands l'chulin for chulin, which we said is regular food, but we're talking over here about bread, right? Maisa, and also for Maisa. Now here, Maisa isn't speaking about regular Maisa, because regular Maisa that goes to the Levi, is on the same level as chulin, okay? Just mentioning that. So the Maisa that we're speaking about over here is a Maisa Sheni. What is Maisa Sheni? Maisa Sheni was every, most of the years of the 7-year cycle, what would happen is after you take off the Truma and after you take off the Maisa, in other words, the Truma for the Kohen and the Maisa Rishon for the Levi, then you would take off a further Maisa, which was called Maisa Sheni, which you would then have to consecrate and take up to Yerushalayim. You take it up to Yerushalayim and consume it in Yerushalayim, but because this has already been consecrated, so it's a level up from Chulin. So he says, but nevertheless, even though it's a level up, it's still enough. It's still enough to wash your hands for bread that is Maisa Sheni, Vilit Truma, and washing. You could also wash your hands for Truma, Ula Kodesh. But when it comes to Kodesh, Matbilin, that's already a higher level. There you have to go and take your hands and not immerse your whole body into the mikvah, but you immerse your hands into a mikvah. This is a level up because we want you to be more sensitive to the level of Kodesh. Let's just look at the first two Rashis. Nitlin liyadayim lechulin ulamaisa ulutruma. So he says, "Dai lehen b'netila dekli." Because it's enough with washing with a vessel that only has nothing more than a revius of water. Okay, that's a quarter of a log. Okay, now ula kodesh matbilin. It says aval lechol shlamim. Here we're talking about kodesh, which means they eat a korban shlamim, a chatas v'asham lekonim, or for a kohen to consume the meat of a chatas or an asham, which was part of the animal was designated for the kohen to eat. For this, he would have to go and he would dip his hands into 40 saw. And even though we're not talking about somebody who knows he came into contact with Tumah. This that we just said, you wash your hands, is just because you weren't conscious about what your hands were doing, and so therefore you don't know for a fact that they never came into contact with anything. Obviously, if you know for a fact that you came into contact with a particular level of tumah, there may be more that you have to do. But here we're talking about just because they were on the level of stam yadayim, which when you have stam yadayim, remember, according to the Torah, you don't have to do anything. It's the Chachamim who came along and said that stam yadayim are now on the level of sheni l'tumah. So he says, "Shalei nogam b'tumah de'iraisa." We were talking about stam yadayim, which didn't touch a tumah d'oraisa, which would then defile, make tummy your whole body. So here we're talking about washing your hands just for stam yadayim. So again, chulin is just washing your hands. Maisa Sheni, that is only washing your hands. Truma is just washing your hands. But Kodesh, that's matbilin. Now, ulechatos, when it comes to chatos, and here we're not talking about a carbon chatos, we're talking about the mei chatos. The mei chatos is the special waters that we get from making the mixture for the paraduma. So, im nitmu yodov, if a person's hands became impure, nitma gufoy. So then we do not come along and say it's just your hands. Now we say, because this is a much higher level, and we want you to be super sensitive, so therefore we say, we consider now that as if your whole body is tummy, and you've got to go to a mikvah, and that's how you're going to become tummy. Now, when it comes to going to mikvah, there's a principle that we're taught here in the Mishnah, and that is you have to have specifically in mind what level you want to be able to eat through this immersion. Okay? So, tova lechulin, if you immersed into a mikvah, in order to purify yourself, to be able to eat chulin, so now, huchzik lechulin, you've now been established as pure for the level of eating chulin, but asur lemaisa. It's asur for you to go with this level of sanctity and eat Maisa Sheni. Why? Not because you're going to a different mikvah. It's the same mikvah, but you didn't have in mind. And again, all of this is in order to be able to make us more sensitive and more aware as to what's going on, right? Otherwise, we lose that mindfulness. So therefore, we're saying we're instituting a rule that if you went into mikvah and all you had in mind was to eat chulin, then you can eat chulin, but you can't eat Maisa Sheni. Tova l'maisa, if you went and immersed for Maisa Sheni, so huchzuk l'maisa, you're now established as being pure from Maisa, but also litruma. You cannot eat truma for the same reason. Tova litruma, if you immersed and you had in mind that now you're going to eat truma, huchzuk litruma, but also l'kodesh. Again, for the same reason, you cannot go and eat kodesh even though you were already in the mikvah, but you only had in mind truma, so therefore we don't consider it to be pure enough to go and eat kodesh. Now, tova l'kodesh, if you immersed for eating kodesh, like a sacrifice, meat of a sacrifice, huchzak l'kodesh, but also l'chatas. For this, you're now going to be able to consume the meat of the animal that you brought up as a sacrifice, but if you're going to come and want to be involved in the process of the mechatas, if you're not on that level of purity, because when you went into mikvah, you didn't have that in mind. However, if I came and I went to the mikvah, for example, and I had in mind that I'm going to the mikvah to eat truma. Now, once I've had in mind to be tahar for the level of truma, I can also eat Maisa Sheni and I can also eat chulin. And the same thing is with all the others. If you had in mind for the mechatas, then you can eat anything, right? In other words, it's not so much that you specifically had in mind for this and for this and for this and for this. It's just a matter of what level you were trying to achieve when you went into the mikvah. So obviously, if you went into the mikvah to achieve the highest level of tahara, then obviously all the things that fall below that category, you are tahar to be able to, you're pure enough to be able to consume those levels as well. Okay, but Hoval, what if a person immersed himself in the mikvah and v'loy huchzak, and meaning what happened over here is he immersed without any specific thought. Either he fell into the mikvah or he just went in without thinking, like, I want to particularly become purified for any level of tumah, not even for chulin. He wasn't thinking anything. He just went into the mikvah and he came out. So it says, here we consider it ki'ilu lo taval. It's as if you didn't immerse at all. You did immerse, it doesn't matter. Here, what is required is your intention. And if you didn't have intention to become pure for a particular level, for any level, then we consider it as if you haven't gone to mikvah at all. Yes?
Why is the difference in what you think when you go in? Why don't people go in and say, I'm dipping in for the most stringent of things, and that's it?
You can.
They have to say, no, I'm only for the easy one, only for the first one.
So the answer is that you can do that. There's no problem doing that. The problem is we want people to be conscious. And the way we do that is by telling you that if you're not conscious, then either you're not going to become tahor at all, or you're only going to be tahor to the level that you thought about when you're going into the mikvah. It's all part of the psychological
And if you don't think of anything, you wasted your time.
Correct. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, "V'loy huchzak." That this is like halfway down the page. "V'loy huchzak," says Rashi. "Loy niskaven l'shem tefilas tahara." You did not have in mind to go for a purification. It's just as if you're bathing. In other words, it's worth nothing if you really didn't have in mind. Even though, well, there's two ways to understand this, I suppose. One way you can understand this is that we're saying if lechatchila you went to take a bath, then the fact that your water may technically be kosher for a mikvah, but because you just went for a bath, so then you're not going to be. Therefore, you're not going to be tahor when you realize, oh, I took a bath this morning, and my bath happens to be kosher for a mikvah. Or the other way to understand it is simply, if you come along and you immerse into a mikvah, we consider it as if you just bathe. Yes, Ezra.
So you have to have this intention prior to stepping into the mikvah, or can you have the intention while you're in the mikvah?
It's as you immerse into the mikvah. Once you are completely immersed, you have to have in mind for what you are becoming more pure. You know what's interesting? What's interesting is those who are aware with the practice of many Kabbalists, and there's many stories about the Baal Shem Tov, is that from this Mishnah you can see that the intentions that you have in mind when you immerse yourself in a mikvah make an actual difference. Once the Chachamim are keveya something, once they establish something, that becomes the reality. I heard once an unbelievable story. I thought of the story just now. I'm reminded of the story. I want to share it because it's a very important story. They tell a story about Reb Chaim Briska, when he became the Rav of Brisk. I think he became the Rav of Brisk, or it was another city before he became the Rav of Brisk, but he became the Rav of the city. And what happened was, there was a guy in that town who, for years, had been practicing literally ganeva, like stealing. How? What would he do? He would go to the butcher, and he would ask the butcher to shecht a chicken. The butcher would shecht the chicken. He would take the chicken home. Then he would come and he would break one of the bones of the chicken in such a way that halachically it would make it no good for shechting. In other words, it's a treifa. And then the Rav would paskin that it's treif. And once it was treif, he'd go back to the sheichet and he'd say, I'd like my money back because it's a treif. I paid for a kosher one. And he'd get his money back. Now, what's the sheichet going to do with the treif? Nothing. So he let the guy take it back and he said, throw it in the garbage on the way out kind of thing. He would take it home, and then he would cook it and eat it because he knew it was kosher, right? It wasn't treif. Anyway, he did this for many years, but when the Brisker Rav came to town and he became the Rav, what happened was this guy tried the same trick. He went and he brought the chicken to the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav looks at it, and he's, poking it one way or the other way, and he can't seem to come up with a final verdict. And this balabas is like, Rebbe, this is a simple question. I could show you in Shulchan Aruch where it says it's treif. So the Brisker Rav says to him, listen, the halacha I know, my mouth doesn't allow me to say that it's treif. There's got to be something wrong over here, and I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. When this person heard the Brisker Rav say this, he realized he's not dealing with anybody. This is a holy person. And that caused him to have a thought, I should do tshuva. What am I doing? What I've been doing for years. How could I do this? So he told the Rav his whole scheme. he broke down crying, and he tells him, for years, this is what I've been doing. I've been breaking the bone. And so the Briskerov was very, very serious. And he says to him, I want you to know that you have to go home and you have to kasher all your kalim. Every single vessel you have at home is treif. Why? He said, but Rebbe, it wasn't really treif. He says, this is where you're making a mistake. When a Rav paskins that something is treif, that changes the metzias of the thing. This now becomes a hefza, an object that is actually not kosher. And the fact that you've been using it, you've been eating non-kosher for many years, and all your vessels are not kosher. So what we see from the story, right, is that when the Chachamim come along and they paskin something, that changes the metzias. And so when a person immerses into the mikvah, in our case, and he only had in mind for chulin, that's it. It's just chulin. And if you didn't have anything in mind, it's nothing. It doesn't count. That's just the way it is. All right. Let me get a bissel weiter. Let's go a bit further. So he says like this. Now, a special thing we need to understand. I explained to you about tumas midras. Tumas midras means, right, that if you lie, if somebody is a avatuma or whatever, then if they lie on something, right, like a zav and a zava, which are avatuma, right, if they lie on something, they make what's underneath it also tamei. So we say like this: Big day am haaretz. When you have the beged of an am haaretz, so we consider that to be tamei. Why? Because an am haaretz is not careful with their hands, or where they sit, or whether they sat on something their wife sat. They're not careful of any of these things, and so therefore we consider them and anything and their clothes to be a midras for Perushin. Perushin are the Pharisees, right? That's the name that they're called. The Pharisees comes from the word Perushin. What's the meaning of Perushin? Literally means that they would separate themselves from the regular people in order to be able to keep their hands clean so that they can eat chulin b'tahara. In order that they can eat the regular bread in b'tahara, they would stay away from everybody, right? They would stay away from the amaratzim, not to come into contact with them, so that they could eat the food b'tahara. That's why they're called Perushin. So we're saying the clothes of an Amaretz are going to be like a midras for a Perushin, that if a kohen touches the clothes of a Perushin, then they become tamei as well. Now, this is not just from a Amaretz to the Perushin, but also for the next level up as well. Because remember, the Perushin, right? We're talking about regular people, right? Or Chachamim, right? But not necessarily Kohanim. So they're only going to be protecting themselves to the level of chulin. That chulin should be should be b'tahara, right? They should eat chulin b'tahara. But big day Perushin medras le'ichle truma. The clothes of the Perushim will become a midras that if they touch the clothes of the Perushin, then the people who are eichle truma, the kohanim who eat truma, they now become tamei as a result of touching the clothes of the Perushim. And bigle eichle truma, the clothes of the people who are careful with their hands to be able to eat truma, right? If they now touch somebody who eats kodesh, so this becomes a midras lekodesh, and that person becomes tamei. In other words, he's going to have to, we said at the beginning of the Mishnah, where kodesh is different, it's not enough to wash his hands, but he's going to have to dip his hands into the mikvah, into the mikvah. Now, big day kodesh, if somebody who's careful with big day with kodesh, then he becomes a midras lechatos for the mechatos that we spoke about, the waters of the para aduma. Okay, now we tell an example of some people who were extremely careful. Yosef ben Yezer, right? We had him before. He was from the first of the Zugais, right? So Yosef ben Yezer, he was the most scrupulous, the most pious of all the Kohanim in terms of being careful with his hands not to come into contact with any tumah. V'hoisa matpachtoi midras the kodesh, and nevertheless his head scarf, like one of the things that he would wear, or his handkerchief, whatever it might have been, right? That now would be a medrash for somebody who's going to eat kodesh, even though we're saying Yosef ben Yezer was so careful to keep his hands clean, right, and not come into anything contact when it comes to truma. But when it comes to kodesh, even his handkerchief, right, or even his headscarf, whatever it was, that how does it translate over here? Sorry, what is it? How does he translate? He says it's okay. His cloth napkin. Okay, fine, whatever. His cloth napkin that's going to be a medrash for kodesh. And now, what about the next guy? So the next guy is Yechanan ben Gudgada. He would not only keep himself clear and clean to eat on the level of truma, he would keep his hands he would keep his hands clean and away from anything that could contract to the level of kodesh. Right? What did we say by kodesh? By kodesh, we said it was till the level of revi'i. That's how careful he was. Right? And all of his days he was careful of that. But nevertheless, but his cloth, his handkerchief, whatever it was considered to be a midras for a chatas. Okay, so that is the Mishnah. Any questions on the Mishnah before we start the Gemara? Okay, so it seems like we're okay. Okay, so let's learn the Gemara. The Gemara is going to ask a question whether or not it's okay to wash your hands for Ma'aser Sheni and Truma, right? Because we're going to have a question from somewhere else, another Mishnah, which seems to say that you don't need to do any of that. So let's do it inside. The Gemara, Chulin, talk about Chulin or Ma'aser, meaning Ma'aser Sheni, Mibo Netilas Yadayim. Do you really need to wash your hands, like we said over here in the Mishnah? Urbino, I'll ask you a question. It seems to be a contradiction from a Mishnah in Bikurim. It says over there, Hatruma v'habikurim. When it comes to Truma and Bikurim, Chayav Malaya Misa, any non-kohen is Chayav Misa for eating them. Okay? And B'chomesh, you have to pay a fifth if you ate them unintentionally. So let me just explain briefly. There are certain things that anybody can eat. There are certain things that only koyanim can eat. Okay, so bikurim and truma can only be eaten by a koyan. Okay, so now if you eat the bikurim and truma, knowing that they're bikurim and knowing that they're truma, that is a very serious violation, and you're chayav misa b'dei shamayim, right? You're chayav misa. But now, what happens if you ate them unintentionally? If you ate them unintentionally, now there's a way to fix it, and the way you fix it is you pay back, right? You just took food that belongs to a kohen. You've got to pay back the food to the kohen. However, we slap on you a fine of an extra 1/5, right? So you've got to give 1.25, right? You've got to give back to the kohen. Now that extra fifth, you don't have to give to this particular kohen. You can give it to any kohen. In other words, if the truma belonged to a kohen and you ate his truma or his bikurim, then you have to give him back what you took from him, right? That's like paying damages, right? But the extra 1/5 you can give to any kohen. Okay, that's with regards to that. We're also lezarim, and they are forbidden to non-kohanim. Vehein nichsei kohen, and they are the property of the kohen. Okay. When it comes to truma and bikurim, if I had, for example, let's take an apple, right? I have one apple, and it falls into another whole pile of apples, and I don't know which apple it is. So we say they're all truma. That's it. You cannot eat them. You cannot. No non-kohen can eat any of them. A kohen can eat them, but no non-kohen can eat any of them. However, if there are 100 other apples, and this falls in as 1 in 100, so this is the 101st one, then we say that they are bottle. And when we say they're a bottle, that means you can eat any of them, but what you have to do is you have to take one from the pile and designate it to the side, put it off to the side as not knowing whether it's true or not. You give it to the kohen, and the rest you can eat. Now, this is what we brought the Mishnah for. It says, "Utu'unin netilas yadayim," and when it comes to Truma and Bikurim, they require washing your hands, Vaharim Shemesh, and for the sun to go down. As I said at the beginning, that when it comes to actual Tumah, one of the things you need to do when it comes to actual Tumah is, like, so let's say somebody's a Zav or a Zava. So they would have to go to the mikvah, but they could not come into contact with anything that required them to be in a level of Kedusha until the sun goes down. Okay, until the sun goes down. If the sun hasn't come down, then your Tahara hasn't fully, the process of your purification hasn't fully taken place. So we're saying that for the Kohanim, they have to wash their hands and they have to wait for sunset before eating them. Hari elu bit truma bikurim. These laws apply for truma bikurim. Masha ein kain b'maisa. Whereas when it comes to maisa, referring to maisa sheni, because b'chulin, how much more so for chulin? That you do not have to wash your hands and you do not have to wait for the sun to set. But what do we see from all of this? Well, we see from all of this that according to this Mishnah, there's absolutely no reason to wash your hands for Maisa Sheni, and certainly you don't have to do it for Chulin. And yet in our Mishnah we said for Chulin, for Maisa Sheni, you do have to wash your hands. So it's Kasha, Maisa, and Maisa. You have a contradiction between the ruling regarding Maisa and Maisa, Kasha, Chulin, and Chulin. And there's a Kasha with regards to Chulin and Chulin, the Chulin in our Mishnah and the Chulin in that Mishnah. So what's the answer? Yeah, everyone understand the question? Yeah. And for the Gemara, Bish says the Gemara like this. Now, 1 second. Bish lema Maisa loikasha. With regards to the question of Maisa and Maisa Sheni and Maisa Sheni, that's not really a big problem. Why? Because Harab Meya v'Harab Banan. Because we could say that one Mishnah goes according to Remeya and one Mishnah goes according to the Rabbanan. Why? Because we've learned that now we've learned in a Mishnah, Kol Haton Bias Mayim B'Divrei Seifrim, anything that requires the immersion in mikvah because of the Divrei Seifrim, the Chachamim required it, is Metames HaKodesh, contaminates Kodesh, or Paisal Truma and invalidates Truma, or Mutar L'Chulin or L'Maisa, but is permitted with regards to Chulin Maisa, Divrei Remeya. So Remeya would be the one that to say in the Mishnah that you just quoted, that you don't have to wash for the Maisa Sheni, right? But the Chachamim say that it is also b'Maisa Sheni. So our Mishnah over here, which says by Maisa Sheni, you have to wash your hands, that would go in accordance with the Chachamim. The Mishnah over there that says that with regards to Maisa Sheni, you don't have to wash your hands, that would be according to Remeya. That's fine. But achulin, kasha, the chulin and chulin would be a question, which means in that Mishnah it says by chulin you don't have to wash your hands. In our Mishnah it says you do have to wash your hands. So l'chayra, and it seems that according to Rebbe Meir and the Rabbanon, you don't have to wash your hands. So seemingly there's a contradiction between our Mishnah and that Mishnah. And for the Gemara, like kasha, it's not a kasha. Why? Kan ba'achila, kan b'negia. One is with regards to actually eating it. So when it comes to eating, then you have to wash your hands. But over there, where it's talking about negia, about touching, so touching, when it comes to chulin, to touch chulin, you don't need to wash your hands. You only need to wash your hands when it comes to chulin with regards to actually eating it. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. And we'll stop here and we'll pick up Yitzchok Hashem from here tomorrow. If there are any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. Shkoyach, everybody. Have a wonderful day. I'm sorry?
Rabbi, what page did you stop?
I stopped on Yudches Amud Beis.
On what page did you stop, Rabbi?
Yudches Amud Beis. Yudches B. 18B, and in the article
Number
it's
4?
18B4. Okay? All right.
Rabbi?
Yep.
Okay.
If chulin is touched by its sav or something, and it's witnessed by other people, don't they have to wash their hands if they even if it's touched before eating it? If there are witnesses who know that person is tuma.
What do witnesses have to do with anything?
Well, I don't know. I'm trying to understand this because you don't. If it's touched, if the bread is touched, it's not. You don't have to wash your hands, but only before eating it. But I'm trying to understand if it's tuma. Somebody's tuma may touch the bread.
We're saying this is specifically with regards to chulin. Chulin, you have no obligation whatsoever to eat b'tahara. We're talking about regular bread. There's no obligation to eat it b'tahara. It's the chachamim that came along and made an extra stringency that when it comes to eating bread, you should do it b'tahara and you should wash your hands. But not because Torah says so, but this is to create a greater sensitivity around the laws of Tumah Tahara, but not because there's some intrinsic obligation to wash your hands. And so therefore, if somebody touched the bread without washing their hands, that doesn't make the bread tameh in the sense that it would for something else that it itself can become tameh. Again, it's not a halacha about the bread. It's a halacha about you, that you should eat the bread with a certain sensitivity, right, to kedusha and tahara. It's not about the bread becoming tameh. Okay?
I see. Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.